nerds and nerdettes and wee little nerdlings all. It's your buddy Big Johnny G, the Two Gun Pixie presents Legendary Gaming. Hey everyone, welcome back to Monday. I'm your buddy Big Johnny G, as you know, and this is part of an ongoing series that I'm starting as a sub-series here. You may have seen the first episode, and which was starting your collection. There's a lot of talk about starting board game collections, advice being given out there. Well, I'm gonna micromanage that advice, because as you can see from my shelves, I love to micromanage my collection. Break it all down by theme and genre. And that's why I'm going to break these lists down. So last time I started off with fantasy games. Now I'm going to take a microscope to that and specify the kind of games I think you will need if you want to start a Dungeons and Dragons board game collection. I'll see you down the table. All right, everyone, thank you very much for joining me for another episode to help you build your gaming shelves. Now, the last time I did do fantasy games, and there was so much more I could have done. I actually could still do a lot more, but I'm going to zero in right now on one aspect, and that's Dungeons and Dragons board games. So, what does make a good beginning collection for this game? Well, you know, I do have those 5 criterias that I look for. Basically, there's a few others thrown in, but for the purposes here of the video, one of the things I look at is there a one-player game, a solo specific game? And the second of the 5 is there a 2-player, a game specifically designed for 2 players? I know of none for Dungeons and Dragons. No game that I know of was made only for 1 player or for 2. If you know of a game that is for 1 only or just 2 players, put it in the comments and let me know, because I'm dying to know. But that moves us on to competitive games. Now, there are a few competitive games for Dungeons and Dragons, as you can imagine. Lords of Waterdeep. Right here, this is probably one of the most popular and well-known of the Dungeons and Dragons board games just to begin with. This is by Wizards of the Coast for 2 to 5 players. Should take 60 to 120 minutes and is good for ages 12 and up. This game, you will be playing one of the secret lords of Waterdeep. The other players won't know who you are, and you won't know who they are. And that's because each lord has a couple of things that they really, really want to get done. And if they get those things done, then they're going to get bonus points at the end of the game. You're just manipulating your workers into places to get what you need. Maybe you need some adventurers to sacrifice to go down into a party. Maybe you need to buy new land. Whatever it is, they're there for you. This is a very popular game, and it is worthy to be on a beginning Dungeons and Dragons board game shelf. Tyrants of the Underdark is a similar game of area control, but this is literally the flip side, you could say, of Waterdeep, because this is taking place in the Underdark. You are playing dark elves. The Drow. Drow, I've heard them called a few times. I call them Drow. And this game is a backstabbing, evil game of land control. And if somebody is on a spot that you want, that you need control of, you can assassinate them in this game. Remember, you are dark elves. Rock, paper, wizard. By WizKids, this game for 3 to 5 players, which takes about 30 minutes and good for ages 14 and up, is a Dungeons & Dragons twist on rock, paper, scissors, where you are playing a group of wizards that banded together to defeat a dragon and take its hoard of gold and treasure. But once it was defeated, you all turned on each other because of gold fever, greed. And now it is a wizard war. And this game utilizes the rock, paper, scissors method of fingers and shapes, and the shape of the fingers is based on spells from your collective spell book. It's a very interesting twist and take on rock, paper, scissors, and anyone that is familiar with that game and who enjoys Dungeons & Dragons, I think will get a good kick out of this game. It's worthy to start a shelf off with. If you're looking for competitive games for a Dungeons & Dragons shelf, Betrayal at Baldur's Gate by Avalon Hill. This is good for 3 to 6 players, takes about 60 minutes, and is good for ages 12 and up. This is a very interesting game because it is not always cooperative. In fact, it will always end one versus all, which is the next category. But the bulk of the game is played cooperatively because the trader doesn't know they're the trader. There are different scenarios in the game, and they're determined by what happens, what you find, where you find it, when you find it. And then you go down this list, this chart, and it tells you what the event is going to be, the haunt. And that also tells you who the trader is. And that point, and only that point, does the trader go off and read a separate passage in their own book, as do the other players. So it is a fantastic cooperative game. It's what I call a 5th player shift, where something happens to change it from a cooperative to a one versus all. The Dungeons & Dragons Adventure System Cooperative Games. This is a series of games that is up to 6 at this point. I had to stop and think about that for a moment. These games are Dungeons & Dragons in a box. They really are. They're cooperative. You're playing against the game itself, but you are playing characters, classes, races, all torn from the pages of D&D. And some of the games themselves, like Castle Ravenloft, are taken from the active work that's been in the game in the past. Also, the Legend of Drizzt is another example of that. This game, if you don't have a DM and you want to play D&D, this is the board game you're going to want to turn to. Now, for one versus all games, one versus all Dungeons & Dragons games, the first thing I have to say is just play Dungeons & Dragons. Let's be honest here. If you're going to play a Dungeons & Dragons board game where it's just one player versus the other players around the board game, it's just play the RPG. But if for some reason you can't play the RPG, there is an alternative to it. And that is the Dungeons & Dragons, the Fantasy Adventure board game. This was by Wizards of the Coast and WizKids, and this was originally published. It came out with 3rd edition, or shortly after, on the heels of 3rd edition, and that's exactly what it is. It is 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons as a board game. It is as close as you can get to being the RPG. So if for whatever reason you can't play Dungeons & Dragons, the role-playing game, you might want to play Dungeons & Dragons, the Fantasy Adventure board game. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Those are the games that I have on my mind. If you're looking to start board gaming and you're looking for a Dungeons & Dragons collection, those are my thoughts on where you might want to start. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm your buddy Big Johnny G for Two Gun Pixie Presents Legendary Gaming. And my friends, I am out of here.